But or is it already on?
I just started it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is SIG Automation on the 19th of October. So we are not going to the status, I think, John, right? So we have today, seems 3 topics.
Yeah, I think let's do the status offline for now.
Yeah. So we have, I think, Fiacra, are you there?
Yeah.
Let's try. Let's try to maybe do it in 25 minutes at least.
Yeah,
that
no,
we spend the time on each other.
I'll try and keep it short. Yeah, I'll definitely try and keep it short. Yeah. So yeah, objective was, if can you give me share rights? I think I have them already.
Yeah, stop.
I have only got one desktop. I'm on my laptop. Yeah, so objective was just to, can you see my screen? You can? I
No.
hope.
No.
No.
Not yet, no.
Hang on. Cancel. Share screen. Come on, Zoom. Zoom is not playing ball. There. Share. Okay, I think we're good now. Yeah, so objective was to have a look at Argo CD versus how do I get this site so odd? I don't like Zoom when it does this silliness. Yeah, so just to have a look at deploying Argo CD as a substitute for config sync within Nefio. So we ran through ran into initial issues in relation to the actual workload cluster package and its dependencies or dependencies within that, the controllers. I think I speak to Vim in relation to that with its dependencies on config sync. So what it did was essentially, Vim gave me a patch and just to remove the dependency. So I have the custom controllers or the custom Nefio controller running here on the VM. And I essentially patched the original workload cluster package. I'll expand this up. The workload cluster package and replaced the config sync with Argo CD. So you can here see I've removed the config sync references and I've done up a custom package here for Argo CD core. This is just the core components that are needed for Argo. And I'm not going to do live demo here, but I've deployed one. Here's one I made earlier. So I have the workload cluster package deployed, and the cluster is up and running, so we can see the packages within it. So here, that's the custom workload cluster package, and your standard CAPI repo VLAN. And then I added the Argo package as a to deploy it into the management staging cluster. I don't know if that's the repo. I don't know if that's the right way for it to be done. But as you can see here, this is a custom package for Argo, your CoinNet, local path, and Multis. So I have the cluster up and running. Sorry for all that. Is that visible? That the text, is it okay in terms of size?
Yeah,
Yes,
it's okay
that's
for
fine.
me.
Yeah. So yeah, just your standard. So this is just your kind of standard worker cluster deployment, and then we have the Argo components deployed within the Argo namespace. So yeah, the only real issue that I hit was in relation to the Bootstrap reconciler, which is, and I think Vim, I'd like to get another closer look at this in terms of and how we should handle it. Better maybe to remove the dependency on config sync. But essentially,
I
so
gave
yeah,
Fiacra. I think
yeah,
we can apply it to, yeah, we can either you do the PR or I do the PR. I don't mind, but I
yeah.
think
I
this
wouldn't
can go in.
mind. Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting involved and as I said,
Yeah.
getting my hands dirty with some tests, maybe hopefully, or just
Yeah,
learn and go a little bit better. But yeah, essentially, so then we have so Argo has its own custom resources, obviously. I can try to see ours here. I have an issue with the
Did you solve the issue? So I believe there is a, so in KRM, or sorry, in kept, we have this local config equals true, right? I think there is someone, this is already a year old, I think, so in Argo, you can have some functions that you can inject to accommodate for it. Did you use that or not? I'll look
I
up.
didn't
But that
know.
was my question too, Wim, like how are we gonna, I think that's one thing very specific to config sync that we use, right? The local config stuff.
Yeah.
So-
So
But there is, yeah, sorry,
there
go ahead,
was
John, go
somebody
ahead.
who integrated, who did this integration, with Kept probably about a year ago. Wim.
Yeah.
One of the Kept community members who built a Argo CD config management plugin that would
Okay.
strip those out. So that's one option.
I haven't come across that now. Maybe I need to, I'm not back. I'm back off annual leave not long, but I'll have to refresh my memory on it. So the local config is telling config sync to
not apply that resource to the cluster. It's just for local
Oh
use.
yes. Yeah,
And
gotcha.
they'll
Yeah.
actually fail to apply, right? Because a lot of times there's no CRD associated with them or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I haven't hit that issue, but yeah, I'll show you what I have working anyway for the moment. But yeah, so Argo has these kind of standard CRDs. So your application, which is, I'll show you a reference to that now. It requires a project. I've just gone with the default project, which gives Argo full permissions to do whatever it wants on the cluster. You can refine those obviously, those RBAC and stuff like that. But the application itself, so if I just show you just did a bit of demo one. So I'll try to show this one. So yeah, this is your application custom resource. So you're telling it to, use your standard server service or the Kubernetes API deployed into this namespace. This is the default project, as I mentioned. And then you're referencing the source where you're pulling the actual the Kubernetes resources from. Obviously, it has support for Helm, kind of standard JSON, and it's a standard directory, which is kind of what I'm using here. So this is a cat package in essence, but it's just reading the. I'll show you the actual structure. It's just a deployment and a service essentially, and then the revision or the branch or whatever. There's a couple of sync options here. I won't go into these, but yeah, so in terms of how it behaves in terms of syncing, and then retry mechanism. Yeah, but so if I just kubectl, we'll just kick off a watch here, but essentially, as you would expect, it just does it just applies the KRMs to the cluster. So I don't want all of that. I want demo. I have an issue with deleting the actual custom resource for whatever reason. It's not tearing everything down, but as you can see there, it just so it deploys the app to the cluster. And the actual, the file itself is just it's a standard. Yeah, looks like a kept file, kept package, but obviously it's just a deployment YAML and service. So that's pretty much is all I have. I was just looking to kind of play around with alternatives to config sync. I know that was on the list of kind of investigations or stuff to look at, but
yeah, I think the big thing you'll probably need to do, like if you were to go look in the actual namespace now, you would see the package context probably config map, which should not be living in the cluster. So that local
when you
config
say
thing.
Yeah, I shared the link of the kept Argo CD, Nicholas Brown. So I shared the link in the Slack channel of SIG Automation that details the Argo CD stuff and what he did to. It's actually 12 months ago. Our memory is very good, John.
That was you. I don't know. It's all a blur to me.
I still
okay, I'll have to have a read through this, I guess. But
there's
how
a
does
whole
that?
thread there, but
Yeah, how does that
So
apply
that's
then? So if we look at something like this, so you're saying that, so
Look at package context, that YAML there.
yep. So it
Do you
has
see
this
how
local
it's a,
config.
a
Yeah.
metadata and
yeah.
it's got that?
Mhm.
So it's a config map. So now normally, if you were
Okay,
running
so
this through config sync, this would not show up in the cluster. But
yes.
since you did it
So if I look for a config map within yeah,
that
okay.
namespace, yeah.
And that cluster, that workload cluster, if you look to
And for
config
this,
map,
it doesn't matter that much because you're deploying one package. But if you had multiple packages, the names would
Yeah,
conflict. If you
okay, so it
had,
deployed that. Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
and if you had another crazy
Yeah,
function
any
config type things, they
any
wouldn't
old
even have a
yeah,
CRD. Yeah, yeah.
okay.
So,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it's
So
pretty
that
easy to it's easy to just strip things off with an annotation, right? It's like super easy to do.
and where would that happen? That would happen within
There's
the
something called apparently I don't know Argo, but there's something called a config management plugin.
yeah.
So basically, you would tell it. I don't know how you tell it it's a kept package and when to use that plugin, but somehow you
Mhm.
do that.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's expandable with plugins. All right, yeah, I didn't get that far, but okay, so that's so the stuff that you don't want. So the local config needs to be stripped before the
stripped.
KRM is
Yeah.
applied. Yeah, 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 okay, okay, gotcha.
I think it's
Um,
probably just
As
like
you
an
know,
option in the application definition or something to use that
uh,
plugin.
yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. I haven't looked at it's not the API. The Flux has a much nicer API than Argo. There's no maybe I haven't found it properly, but yeah, I haven't looked at it properly. But yeah, finding a clear API for the custom resources isn't um
but
yeah, but that's
yeah,
all I got. That's all I have, guys. And if there's anything of benefit there, I can yeah, I don't know, but
Yeah,
uh
no, that's awesome. I mean, I think that so the question I have would be how is that application CRD created? It's when you go to do a deployment.
so it gets deployed as part of the package. So within the actually no, where is the yeah this is so yeah I had an issue with importing this as well because it's too big. The UI doesn't like it. I get a 413 um because it's over a megabyte. But yeah, so you have your CRDs here. It's like this is a first draft, if you like, of an Argo package, and it's quite
Right.
it's quite big, But yeah, these get applied to the cluster when
But the
you.
specific application, not the CRD, I should have said the
Oh,
CR.
okay, yeah, no. So I
Um,
haven't I haven't done so I haven't packaged that at all. So I'm all I'm doing is kubectl apply at the moment. But
got it. Okay.
in essence, you could package that like I did for the Flux package or whatever, the Flux kept package.
Right. So you deploy in that case a kept package with it's kind of indirection, right? You could deploy a kept. It's kind. So if you look at the issue 210, I think it is, take a look at that and see and comment on it about. I suspect that if we essentially that introduces an indirection in our existing flow, and that indirection potentially because config sync has a similar thing to an application. It's like a repo sync or a root sync, right? They're
Yeah,
stupid
yeah.
names, but that's what they are. They That's similar to an application in direction.
Mhm.
So what I propose in that issue is that we have a controller which generates those a collection of those. So instead of deploying packages directly off the main branch
Mhm.
in the workload cluster, we would have a list. It's like an app of apps, I think they call them in the Argo world. We would
Yeah,
have a list. We'd have a single package that contains a list of those repo syncs, root syncs, and could include applications. Then, if you're doing Argo CD. So I think that pattern will fit well with
yeah. You
Argo
can have
CD. And it kind of makes things like rollback of version and roll out of version much more robust. So, yeah, if you can take a look at that, and Liam was looking at it too, I think. So, like,
yeah.
and
So this something along these lines, John. So multiple sources for an app. Is that what you mean? So
it's not
you can have
exactly that. It's
no.
more app of apps. It's like you could have an application that contains a bunch of application resources. And then you associate that collection of applications with a given workload cluster. That's
Okay.
essentially what I'm saying we do. It's just that I want to do it in a way that's not Argo specific or not config sync specific.
Yeah.
So what I described was config sync specific. We would have a package of repo syncs and root syncs. But if we had a package, I mean, they're all just resources. So we could have a package of applications, and that would be equivalent when using Argo CD to a package of root syncs and repo syncs in config sync.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I'm saying. So just take a look at it, read it over, provide your thoughts on how that would work. All I say in there is I think this will work better with Argo CD. So here they talk about app of apps, right? So it's a similar kind of concept. It's essentially, if you look at what we're doing with the workload cluster package, which is a package of package variants, that's a sort of app of apps pattern. It's the same pattern. It's just a different resource that allows some different, has the API to do the mutations and to deliver things to different repositories, which is a little bit different. Yeah, Wim.
Yeah, I basically had one question and a statement. Is also, Bianca, did you sort out on how you built add the secret to Argo to get access to Git, so that it's not just plain, but
No,
with
I didn't.
with a secure?
No, I didn't. I was off on a week's leave last week, but no, I didn't get to look at secure. But yeah, that's and it's something that so the reconciliation by default is 3 minutes or something, and it would be better to use a webhook, from your repo, say if you're using Git or whatever. I think the webhook would I don't know what the opinion is there, but I think using a webhook would be better. To
But
trigger
the problem is that you need to get the secret. So what we did in our one, which basically was also discussed yesterday a little bit. By the way, John, when looking to the code, is not a token controller. So we have basically a token controller, which basically takes a token from Git, right, and provides a secret into our management cluster, right? So that's one thing. The second thing that we have is we have a way to distribute secrets into the management cluster. So this is one, which is, so there is two controllers. One is the Bootstrap controller, and the other one is the Bootstrap package controller and the Bootstrap secret controller. And so it's a secret controller now. So also Fiacre, I gave him a patch to, because we had a hard. So I basically put something in that was specific to config sync. We could do the same. I saw yesterday when Sagar asked me the question on how to distribute a secret. There's something similar in that controller, which is looking at config sync. So we could make that more generic. Then we don't have the special dependency on config sync. I'm not sure whether anyone is willing to take this up or not. I can help them to show the code and stuff like that. But there is these two controllers that have a dependency to config sync. So the secret one is, I think we didn't have impact for, but because Fiacre used plain Git access, so there's no, it doesn't use it.
I didn't hit the issue.
So it didn't hit that issue, but for the packages, he hit that issue because there was a mapping to config sync. So we could, I believe I have a way to remove that and make it more generic, such that we don't have a dependency on config sync, which would be good, I think, in general, right?
Sure.
So if can I maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but this secret is used by the worker cluster to write to.
So the secrets. So what happens is what happens is the token controller basically asks for a secret to access Git, right? And we have a token. So we have a token for every workload cluster, a dedicated token, because from a security point of view, I believe it's better to have one. If you then have to revoke one, you can do it per workload cluster. So that's one. And then there is two steps. One is the token controller on the management cluster gets that token from the Git repo. So in this case, it's Gitea, right? But we can make this also to Git or to other implementations. And that creates a secret inside of the management cluster that represents access towards the Git repository. And then there is the Bootstrap secret controller, which takes that secret, because there is some annotations that we put onto it, and takes that secret and moves that to the workload cluster, because the root sync and the repo sync objects that John was referring to refer to that secret to get access towards Git. You see?
Oh, yeah. It's sorry now, but is there any kind of workflow diagrams, or it'd be really helpful to have
I can create that for you if you want. Yeah,
it was just in terms of the flow of I can understand it to a degree, but visually,
Then
yeah.
Then config goes and gets the kit package and installs it locally. That's how it works.
Yeah, it's just essentially the Bootstrap controller needs to use direct API access to provision the GitOps tool running on the workload cluster to be able to pull from to provision provision the secrets it needs to pull from the management cluster.
Yeah.
Is there
but I'll make a quick drawing. It makes it probably easier to understand. But yeah, I mean, Fiacra, if you're willing to work on this, that would be great, because then we can make it generic. Because then we can use config sync, Argo, and Flux.
I'll touch base with you, Vim, and I'll leave it there. I'm a couple minutes over, and thanks, guys.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great stuff.
Yeah, thanks. I have one question actually to maybe all three of you. Sorry, Wim, John, and Fiacra. So the equivalent of local config, right, is that kept functions that you were talking about. Is it going to replace? Obviously, we do not. When we say local config, we do not want that to be applied on the target cluster. So instead of just removing the annotation, we essentially have to create an equivalent of Argo CD, so that we even don't want Argo CD to apply to the target.
So the way it works, it's not that you remove the annotation, it's that there's a filter that you can install, like called a config management plugin, but it's essentially it takes the data from Git and then it applies that plugin to it, which in this case would strip out any resources with that annotation. So what actually gets applied to the cluster by the Argo CD tool is it's the same thing that config sync would have applied. So it's just a plugin to do that same thing that config sync has built in.
Okay. Basically, sorry, I meant it's basically it physically removes that resource.
Yeah, it just excludes the resource from the eventual. So the equivalent would be like you could do it without that plugin, but it would be painful, because what you would do is every package that's going to be delivered by Argo CD, you would create a package variant resource that appends to the function pipeline something that strips out those resources. Actually, I don't even think you could do that, because I think we only prepend to the function pipeline. So anyway, it's much easier way to do it is within Argo CD, you add this plugin so that what it reads from Git, it then goes through and basically it runs a kept function to filter out those resources, and then it takes the output of that as the new code to apply to the API server. Basically, config Argo CD allows you to say, here's my Git repo. Before you actually apply it to the API server, run it through this plugin.
Okay.
In my view, is the plugin in Argo CD to make it work with kept and use kept as we want the kept packages as we want them to be consumed, right? Because the annotation tells you whether or not to apply this information to the cluster, right? And so this plugin gives Argo CD the awareness of what it should apply or not apply to the cluster, and it like John said, it filters out the things that it should not apply, and then it just applies the things that are still relevant after the filter.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, just to clarify one more misunderstanding. So does it run and so whose responsibility is it to run this particular package? Is it Argo CD who's running it as a part of its pipeline?
Yes, as I understand it, Argo CD, it's a configuration in Argo CD, but I don't know enough about Argo to answer that exactly.
Yeah. So you install, when you install Argo, you need to install this plugin, and then it's like with config sync, I think it does it automatically with the filter, with the Gaia filters. I think it happens there, John, right? So here Argo does something equivalent. So it has a pluggable framework that you can inject that function. So when it pulls the packages, it will filter these resources and then only apply what's left on the workload cluster.
And I guess if we're using Flux, we'd have to find some way, other mechanism to do the same thing in
same.
Flux.
Yeah. We have to do the same. Yeah, correct.
Cool. So now,
all right.
Now I understand.
Given time,
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Given time, maybe we should move to the second topic. Otherwise, so Joseph, did you create something, or should it be like a generic discussion?
Sagar has prepared some presentation, so we can go through that.
Yeah, so
right.
I can share my screen quickly. Just a minute. There you go. If you can see my screen now. Can you see it?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, perfect. There's an asterisk just because I mean, there can be different ways of configuration management. That's it. Yeah. So I just wanted to. So what Joseph shared yesterday and even before, I just want to classify that what he shared in terms of configuration, in like 3 different categories. There can be more categories. Let's say I just want to broadly classify it for the moment. Like first is common 3GPP parameters, like parameters which are common to more than 2 NFs. So let's say PLM and the slice identifier kind of information, which is required mostly a lot of NFs, let's say. And then after that, there is this, after the second category is like NF specific or NF specific 3GPP or ORAN parameters, like some parameters which are really specific to the network function, but still they are defined in 3GPP in any of the 3GPP specifications. Or let's say 3GPP has this dedicated working group known as SA5, which defines young models, or let's say in one of those young models, so which are very specific to 3GPP. Then again, the third one is vendor or provider specific parameters, which are specific to the vendor or the provider of the network function. And that can be just an example like log level or container images. If the NF is deployed, if NF is comprised of microservices, for example, like right now, OAI or even FIGRA-GC have made AMF with only one single image. But there are a lot of other vendors in reality, like who have multiple images just to realize an AMF. So let's say they're going to have, 50 images to realize an AMF. So in that case, there can be different container images. So to handle all these 3 different type of configuration parameters, so I've defined 3 different ways, exactly the same way what Joseph did, just added a little bit more parameters and so there, for example, for packaging, as he explained earlier, it's going to be more, let's say that if we choose this method of config ref, let's say that there is a config ref, which is, which we always had from R1, where we have all the parameters, and then there's this config section. In the config section, we will have this kind of CR. So I wanted to just add one thing which Joseph said yesterday, and then I think there was a confusion that, so this is just a CR. There is no CRD behind this CR. So there is this CR, which you see here, in which they have these, where you have all these parameters. Let me turn on the laser. Yeah. So this.
We should have a CRD. So Sagar, in my view, we should have a CRD for validation eventually, right? So you can do some validation from it.
If you want to ever apply it to a cluster, right, for injection purposes, eventually we'll be able to inject, and I know that this config thing does this already, like inject from another package, so it doesn't have to have it. But for validation and I think it's better to have a CRD for it eventually, for sure.
I'm perfectly fine with that idea. I was just clearing, what he mentioned earlier. But I'm perfectly fine with this idea. But with this, there's a limitation we all have to remember that, I think the EDCD limit, that the limit is 1 MB, so it cannot go more than that, let's say. So if we have this kind of a common configuration, then we will have a limit on this 1 MB of, I think, which we can go in etcd, so we remember this. And then for the deployment, we deploy it using package variant set, because the same configuration will be used by multiple NF. So when I say multiple, it means in more than 2 NF. So it will go in different clusters, and in different clusters, it will be applied in different namespaces. And then for implementation, either we use this dependency method, which he mentioned, Joseph. Like we use this dependency method, which is using dependency.yaml, or there is another method which I thought about. It's more like that the operator which we designed, the Go or the Python operator, it will hold the deployment till the time the configuration, or let's say this kind is available or not in the namespace. It will keep on looking. If it's available, the moment it's available, it will deploy. If not, it won't. So that's one approach.
That we have to do no matter what, in my view. That's part of the operator should act upon that, right? So you should not continue unless all the things that are referred to in the NF deployment are actuated. Only when they're all there, we should continue. So the operator should take that into account.
Okay, so second approach is mandatory, let's say. Second approach is mandatory, and it has to be there.
Yes,
so first one,
because otherwise you start deploying without having the full configuration, right? So in most cases it will fail, because what we are talking about here is the initial config, basically, right?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that's true. So I mean, if we use the second approach, so dependency is not really needed, let's say, because the package variant set will already create this CR, and the operator can read this CR, So dependency is, if it's there or not, it does not really change anything, I would say.
So Sagar, that means in this second case, I think it's EV. In the package, you include a config with params embedded in it, right? That's what you mean. Not
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, even in the first option also, it has to be there, but then you have this extra dependency.yaml, that's it.
But so Sagar, I think we have to, or at least from my understanding, there is two pieces to it, right? One is in the package, and what comes at the package in the beginning, right? So the dependency.yaml is what is in the package in the beginning, but that thing is never that also has local config true, right? So it will never be applied to the workload cluster, right? So and that's a way to inject, if you will. So that's this Postman injection. Inject other resources into the package dynamically, right? So that's what this thing does. So in other words, the dependency.yaml, when you apply to the workload cluster, is not relevant. It's the result in the NF deployment has a set of resources embedded, and these are the one on which we have to do that check, right? So anything on dependency.yaml, the specialization workflow will deal with that, right? Because the way the controller works right now, if you specify dependency.yaml and this thing is not resolved, specialization will hold it. So you will not succeed until the dependencies are resolved, right? So that's implicitly
built
into the specialization.
It's a way to coordinate the collaborative creation of the intent, and to sort of wait for things on the management cluster side before even going to the workload cluster, is what you're saying.
Correct, yeah. So in other words, everything you put in dependency.yaml, if you cannot resolve it, specialization will not continue. So basically it will never succeed, or all the conditions in specialization, so the dependency condition will be false until it's resolved, and only then it will hydrate or so on. So that's the flow. So for me, what we are discussing here is so for me, what matters to the workload cluster is what comes out of NF deployment. So when specialization finalizes it, there is a set of parameter ref applied to NF deployment, and these are the ones we have to, the operator at the workload cluster has to check whether they are actuated before we deploy the thing, right? So they are, for me, the dependency YAML is happening at specialization layer, whereas the NF deployment thing is is happening at the workload cluster. So they happen at different stages into our pipeline.
Yes, I got your point. So let's say to conclude, it's a two-step process.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
because the second step, it has to be there at any point of time, So it's a two-step process.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So now when I mentioned that the common 3GPP parameters, it means that so there is a choice. Either we define the whole list of 3GPP parameters and the kind based on some 3GPP specification, or we let it open, We don't define it, or we define like the bare minimum for the moment in the CID, because we have to define the CID. So either I define a CID using like these parameters, which you are seeing right now here, and we need to choose the name of that CID also, because we need to choose a kind. So, so how do you want to proceed with that?
Yeah, so what I would like to do, Sagar, or at least my proposal would be this, right? We have a set of parameters of FreeFive today, which are hard-coded, which we know, right? And for both AMF, SMF, and UPF. We have a set of parameters for both core and radio that we have from OAI, right? And we come up with a combined thing based on, I think the way I look at the criteria is I think you have a good segregation, but I would add one more is which elements need that information somehow. So there is a topology. So that is common and NF specific, right? And to each of them, I think based on who needs that, right, we could split that up as well, or we could basically say what Joseph was proposing yesterday. Okay, we don't care for now. We basically put everything to every parameter everywhere, and then the operator will figure out whether or not he needs it. So we could have both of these approaches. The problem with the latter is that if we ever change something, we might have implications about it. So the idea was, let's think it a little bit through. Probably let's not over architect things, but let's say consider these things. So,
yeah, that's why I was going on the second one. I mean, this one, if you define a CID, so I even in FreeFive, these were the basic parameters which it more or less needs. It needs PLMN, and all these parameters are common to all the NFs which are there. AMF requires this, SMF requires this, and UPF requires this.
So here's how I think about these models, right? Is that they're contracts between our management layer and the network function packages. So if we make one giant structure with everything in it, then there's no way to be refined when you create a package. If I'm a vendor and I say I have a network function and it needs these 7 parameters that are very specific, I have no way of saying I only need those 7 parameters. And so that means that I can no longer use that package in an environment that doesn't have the entire structure available, right? There's no way to validate the idea behind these structures, and that they're APIs, that they're structures, is that depending on your particular deployment, you may have certain subsets of them available, and there are certain network functions that require different subsets of them. And so you want to be able to know when you can satisfy the requirements of that network function. If that network function can only say, I need everything, then you always have to have everything available. Now, I don't know if that's a real problem, but in my experience, that is just generally that is an area where if you make the API too big, you create too clunky of a mechanism. Tal?
Yeah, I do think it's a problem, and because we want things to be validated, I think, as early as possible, right, before they actually go and fail, right? When you onboard something, you want to make sure that it is a valid onboarding. So I always imagined that we would have kept functions that validate for specific things, right? So there's a whole set of have to be a set of them, and some of them might have to be vendor specific too, right? A validation function, and I introduced the concept before that we need to differentiate between two kinds of validation. There's partial validation and complete validation. Partial validation happens during the specialization process where we don't have everything yet, but we want to make sure that what we do have is valid, right? So there might be missing properties that later in the pipeline will be included, right? And of course, until the moment of deployment, right, when it's fully specialized, you don't have the complete. So the final complete validation should be the last function, right, in the pipeline.
Right. So I would say though, functions aren't the only, like schema itself is a validation, right? The definition of the schema.
That's true, but I think that's only part of it, right? Because there are semantic validations that go beyond schema.
Agreed. I'm just saying I just wanted to make sure we weren't thinking it's only functions, that because what we're talking about here is defining schema. So at the very minimum, you start with the structure of the schema. So like if I'm a network function that only needs the PLMN and some other field, right? Like I should be, if that's an appropriate thing that we see across many functions, we should create a structure that just represents that. And then the function can declare its minimum needs. And that way you can use it in many situations. And that's kind of orthogonal to what you're saying. Totally agree with everything you're saying too, that we need throughout the process partial and complete validation at the end. So, but I want to be sure that the model that we create enables. It's sort of what Wim said in the beginning. If you make a big one, it makes it impossible to change later because you don't know who's using what part of it, and so you'll break everybody. Right? You can't make any kind of backward compatibility guarantee. You kind of get yourself in a trap.
Well,
so
in a way, that's my point, because I think validation goes beyond schema because we're creating a flexible schema, right? In a way that could be modified, right, and could be enhanced. So the validation logic could include that, right? Take into account that there might be areas of the schema that are extensible.
Sure.
I'm not saying we have to do that, right? We could, insist on develop a schema and then say that's it, right? But because we're not dealing with CRDs here, right? We're dealing with types that we don't have to use OpenAPI v3, which is powerful but also limited, right? We have the opportunity to create a kept function that validates the way we want it to validate.
Sure. But I think that's, I agree. I think it's orthogonal to what I'm trying to say, and maybe I can articulate it better in a non-telco world. Like if I have a package that requires a JDBC connection string or equivalent ODBC connection string of some sort, right? I can create a resource that says I need, a SQL check connection to a SQL database, and here's the structure of what that parameter looks like, and I can advertise that. Now I might also need connection to an object store, but I want those to be two different APIs. I want those to be two different resources. If we created one that was just storage and just glued those together, then it would become difficult for another package that only needs one of them to express its minimum requirements. So that's what I'm getting at, is like I want to make sure that the structures that we use for packages to communicate their needs allow them to communicate their needs in logical units that make sense across many packages. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't know enough about the 3GPP models to say what those are, but I think probably 3GPP specification people designing those models already knew this and already built them that way. But so I'm hoping we cannot lose that.
Okay, yeah, I see your point. Yeah, this is the modeling issue, right? We're moving into domains that are defined by 3GPP and others. There'll be ORAN, right? Specific things as well. So yeah, I agree with you that we have to be careful and maybe break it down to as many pieces as possible so that it's not one monolith config, right? But rather subconfigs that could be assembled together according to the specific use case and packaging. Yeah, point well taken, I think.
Yes. actually, I was trying to point out that I'm not going for a huge config, That's what I was trying to say, that right now what I showed, it's a common config for all of them, but that doesn't mean that it has all the configuration which all of them they need. There is like the next slide was on this, that there is something which is specific to only one particular NF, but it's not required by the other one. So such kind of configuration, I believe we don't really have either. I mean, it depends if that we really define it, that we make a CRD for this, or we make a CRD for this, or we just have a CR and let's say a KBD function validate it, and that KBD function can also come from Nefio or from, let's say, from the vendor or the provider. And this one we can deploy, and we can leave this kind of config ref inside. So we can leave this kind of config ref inside the NF deployment package of the network function. We can leave it in the package itself. I think that will be better. And once we leave it in the package, we can either manually mention it inside the NF deployment CR, or we can have, let's say, a KBD function which reads all such kind of config refs which are there, and then manually appends, and then it's automatically appends it into the NF deployment CR, and it can be like a pipeline in the KBD file. So that was one approach for handling provider or vendor specific parameters. And when it's NF specific parameters, which is against a little bit 3GPP and ORAN, such parameters can be handled either via the first approach where where I talked about the common 3GPP parameters, or the second one where it's vendor or provider specific. But if we make a lot of Git repositories for each and every specific NF, then there will be a lot of Git repositories, So that
why should that be different?
I don't.
So Sagar, why should there be a different Git repository? Because in my view, so you have a package, right? And in that package, you have a set of CRs, right? And
yes, but
so we don't necessarily.
What I wanted to mention that in this approach, in this approach, the common 3GPP approach, I also mentioned that that will be a separate Git repository to manage only the common 3GPP configuration, You see?
I think the repository may not be required, I think, right? Just one I mean, yeah, you just have one package with multiple CRs with different kinds. That's what I was thinking.
You could certainly package a given set of topologies into or whatever value collection of parameters that go together into a package with different CRs. I think that makes total sense. It wouldn't be a different repo, but yeah, a different package. You could do that if you wanted to. And then you could mix in. That's effectively what you're doing with this dependency controller. You're kind of mixing in that package to multiple other packages. I think that's totally viable approach. I think that I'm a little bit wary of wrapping everything in a config and not creating CRDs for them, because CRDs are sort of it's the commonly agreed schema. And when we're all in one little world here together, then not having a CRD maybe works fine. But when you all of a sudden want to create a distributed thing where you've got 50 different vendors creating things, and you've got different infrastructure providers creating things, and you've got different tooling vendors who want to be able to read this data out of the API server and create a map or whatever they want to do with it, or create a UI that they can operate on it, I think that then that agreement on what the schema is becomes really important. So I'm hesitant to just say wrap it all and don't put a CRD for the underlying things. Boy, there's a bunch of hands on that. I have no idea what the ordering is of the hands. So I guess
it's all first, I think. All first. Yeah.
Sure. So point taken again, but I would say that there's a middle ground. Rather than having strict schemas for the CRDs, which I think could be limiting. We have to think of the trade. I think there's trade-offs just to that approach. But I say a middle ground is that we can have, rather than multiple CRDs having multiple kinds, right? For me, the idea of having just a config kind is doesn't tell you anything, right? Config can be absolutely anything. It's far too vague. I think if we have a set of kinds with their own internal rules. So again, I'm going back to what I said before. We don't have to use Open API v3 schema, right, for each of these kinds. It could be more complex semantics. And that gives us the flexibility really to allow every kind to have its own kind of behavior. So yeah, Wim, yeah, right. So different kinds can tell you what you're actually configuring, and they can have their own validation rules that are well documented, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, when you validate something, you get an error, right? It's invalid, right? But that error doesn't have to come from simply schema validation, but can be something richer, right? And I didn't mention this before, but validation can also happen at the level of topology, right? There's validation between. You're not just validating this CR, right? Or
I think we should separate schema from validation. Like schema is partially is sort of the minimum like things it has to meet to even be stored. And then there's a bazillion validations we can do on top of that are independent of schema. But you do want to at least agree on the names of the fields and what data types they have, you know?
Right. I think I'm not saying something too different. I'm saying that schema can be more flexible than just so I mean, to get very technical, Open API v3 has limited ability to say, for example, if you have one property, it can be only one of these properties, right? Or multiple of these properties. It has some simple validation in terms of grouping properties together, things like that. But it doesn't get very rich in terms of, for example, if you have an IP address, that it has to be an IP address, right? Or
so
it can't
there are
Kubernetes
has some extensions on that, but I think
but I think Tal right now, okay, my view is this. Let's first we can discuss a new Open API schema and stuff like that, but would we not, for me, let's first focus on what we need for our tool, right, as a base thing, right? And I would propose to use CRDs with Open API for now, because that's the mechanism we have. We can always enhance it, right? And because right now they are even adding cell functions, which can do way more advanced logic in validation, as well as in, so there is, like the things that you say, like, is this a valid IP address? You can do today in Open API.
Kubernetes flavor.
You're right. That wasn't a good example, but
that's a bad example. But there is others, relationship type of things. It's harder, but I think with all the cell functions that they are adding, I think they are adding more and more capabilities, which gives us more options going forward, I think. But nevertheless, what I was trying to say is,
Well, maybe just to summarize my point, my issue is that having many kinds versus one, that's kind of what we're.
There are many kinds here, though, right? There's just a wrapper kind too, right? So that within that, they're all different kinds. I think they're already proposing that.
Well, but the config kind is just open, right?
No, it wraps other kinds. That's all it does.
Yes, it's a wrapper, so you can do validation
inside of it have to be
within
kinds.
it. Yeah.
That's my understanding.
You can semantically validate what's in config. That's correct. Yeah, you're right, I think, Joe.
Okay, I'll let other people speak, but I do think there's a problem here, though, because again, it's kind of validating across multiple CRs at the same time, right? That's my point. Yes, config is a wrapper, but it refers to other kinds, right? So you can validate every one of them individually, but our problem is, that they all work together.
Yes. But that's a mechanism that today, that's another mechanism we don't have in Kubernetes right now. So, but you can also solve it with a cap function.
That's we do that with packages. But let's let I think Bala was next.
I'm still trying to grasp this, so my statements and questions may be a bit on the sillier side. So the first question is, if it is more than 1 MB, are we going to create multiple of them? Is that how we're going to handle? And then the same controller will take care of, obviously the same controller will handle, and they'll see, there are some kind of chaining between them.
I think, Bala, if I may to respond, so here is the following, right? How we see it. We need a bunch of parameters, right? So one approach is we clap them all together in one big kind. So I'm making extreme scenario, right? The problem is that, let's say SMF needs 50%, AMF 30%, and UPF maybe 70% or something, right? And then run 20%. So the problem here is that if we ever change the structure of that thing, right, then you have to basically probably change the underlying implementations to figure out who is using what, right? The other approach is to let's say segment that into pieces that have relevance to the consumer, right? And by doing so, you end up with more CRs, basically, or more, but you will have the impact of change is going to be hopefully less going forward. So that's kind of the discussion from my perspective. Does that give you a perspective, or did I confuse you?
Well, from the point of view specifically of the technical limitation, so any one of those individual kinds is not likely to be larger than 1 MB, but when you aggregate them all together, they may be. And I think what you're asking is we might have to split them into multiple config refs if one config ref which encapsulates a whole bunch of, it's sort of like tunneling, right, in networking, right? How much can you tunnel in a packet, right? Like you can fit a certain amount and then you have to fragment, right? Like, so it's a similar kind of thing we would probably have to do.
Okay, cool, thanks. And in the next slide, if you Sagar, I'm kind of trying to understand how are we going to do the vendor specific params. How do we, this is where in general everybody, all the modeling has been very tricky, whether it's ASN in terms of in case of SNMP, or Yang in terms of they all have very proprietary models. So in this particular case, obviously 3GPP models are there, but if there are any vendor specific params, how are we going to anticipate that in a CRD?
We don't. We allow them to create their own vendor specific CRD, and we just reference it from a config.
Okay, thank you. So that's the point I was missing. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm done.
Joseph, I think we're over time, but
yeah, I think I just wanted to summarize. I think Wim, we were saying initially, right? I mean, to analyze at least for a start, to analyze all the parameters that 3GPP is using and OAI is using. So I think we can look at starting with that and then map it to what Sagar is saying. For example, if there are common parameters across all NFs, across OAI and this one, I think we create as part of the first CR, that is the params 3GPP or whatever kind, one particular kind, and put it all there. And then if there are specific to NF, for example, SMF in OAI and SMF in pre-5GC uses same parameters requires, then you put it in this type. And then if there are vendor specific that only OAI uses and only pre-5GC uses, and then we create those as part of the individual package. So maybe can we look at starting with this approach?
So are you saying, Joseph, what I would personally advocate we do is we take all the parameters from pre-5GC we have for SMF, UPF, and AMF. We take all the parameters for OAI, and we come up with an approach based on Sagar's outline that he has, but also take into account the consumers, right? Take into account the consumers that use that. So if someone could segment that landscape a little bit, that would, in my view, ease the conversation. One comment that I also wanted to make is in Sagar's proposal, I just made it on the comment, is like DNNs, right? You need an IP address. And so these needs to be going through the specialization, because without getting an IP address that is relevant to the rest of the system, you will not get it to work. So, and that's already provisioned in the NF deployment spec at the moment.
Yeah,
so if we change that, this will be having some more implications, by the way. So But so my question is, can someone assemble the things from FreeFiveDC that we have in place and the OAI, radio and core, and come up with a structure that we would like to apply? Is someone willing?
I can do that. I just want to mention that for that, Wim, the problem is the approach which you mentioned from the beginning. Since there is no slicing information available there, you just mentioned the DNN and the IP address mapping, but there is no slicing. So the problem comes. That's the place where the problem comes. That I mentioned that here I am adding the slice and the DNN combination, whereas the one which you provided from the beginning, there was no slicing information. So that
but we can also so Sagar, we can also add. So we can be open, right? So we can add things in various places. So we can also update what was done there, right?
Okay. If you're open with that, then I can do something. I combine everything together. I open an issue we discussed there. Okay.
Yeah.
I combine everything together there. Okay.
Yeah. That's perfectly
perfect.
valid, I think. Right? Yeah.
Okay, so just to conclude, quickly, because we never conclude, that we have this approach and we create a CRD with all the common parameters, or we create a CRD, right, for all the common parameters.
So see, what we have to do is what I proposed was this, right? We take FreeFiveDC parameters that we have that we are deploying in R1. We take the additions in OAI for both core and radio, right? And we come up with a proposal on the various kinds, like Tal, I think, suggests, that would resemble the pieces that we need, right? And that's what we have to do. And the proposal would be a CRD, right? So we would come up with a set of CRDs, which have each different kinds that resemble that information. I think that's the ask here.
Okay, and how we deploy it? We deploy it using this dependency and the method which
I think there we settled upon. Yeah, I think for now we settled upon that based on the previous conversation, unless we see that we have a problem. But I think for now, the approach that we discussed with Joseph before, I think we apply, and unless we see a major problem with it, then we can change.
Okay.
Sort of as a criteria for the kinds, think about those consumers Ben was talking about. Like, you would want if would want to make it a kind if like there's a set of consumers that would want to say, I need to know that information kind of as a unit, right? That might not want other information. That's kind of how you divide up the kinds.
Yes, I agree with John. Yes. So I would also look at it from a consumption point of view, is who needs what.
So Wim and Sagar, does 3GPP, must have thought through this exact same problem statement that John is stating, right? So is there any such segregation in this specification itself?
There is actually. I mentioned in the beginning, actually, there is this 3GPP SA5 working group, which only does this. They are the one who makes all these young models. And in the young model, they tell, that this is the common young model. Then there is DU specific model, there is CU specific model, there is AMF, SMF, UPF. So they have for every single NF specific models, and in all these models they have different parameters. For example, like this parameter we see here, common model type, it comes from there. Okay. So I have taken a lot of things from there. I cannot really copy and paste directly because I think we are not allowed to do that. Of course, we have to change little things, I think. So I am getting inspired from there, let's say, that's the word.
Okay, okay, cool. Thank you so much. Yeah. I think basically this is derived from 3GPP Yang models.
Exactly.
If you could the link to those Yang models too in the chat, that would be, I really appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
Definitely, I'll do that actually. When I'll open the issue, I'll do that definitely. And I'll send you those.
Well, thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
Okay,
all right,
thank you so much.
So, and Sagar, will you present that next week?
Yeah, I'll
share the issue.
Issue I'll
the sooner
now
because we need to sort this out ASAP, right? Because this will probably be dependent for R2.
Yeah, I think Wim and Sagar, that was my next point. This is we are looking at. I think John, I think dates have to shift at this point of time. So obviously, so because this is. We had to define this. So Wim, are you suggesting that we do the specification by next week and then start the implementation? because this will change both Free 5GC and as well as OAI.
Yeah, so I mean, the sooner we do this, the better. I mean, we don't have to, for me, I don't have to wait till next week. The sooner we have this sorted, the better. So for me, we can do this on Slack as well if you want, or
Yes,
set up a
Slack
dedicated meeting if we have to, or whatever. Right? Yeah.
So one other thing, there is Liam wanted to get to that. He had created a few discussion topics in GitHub. You can use the GitHub discussions as well, so that this can be persistent there, and we can do that as well.
Yeah, just nicely queued me up. Yeah, 30 seconds, guys. Have a look in here, because I already posted it in the Slack, but the kind of response in there so far has been a little bit underwhelming. So I thought people might be more interested. Maybe maybe
it's just a good topic. Yeah, Liam, it's a good topic. Converge and
maybe we need to put in more controversial topics. I mean, or maybe I should put in some. Anyway, if people can have a look, it'd be great.
But I think, Liam, we should bring this up again in the next meeting, because I think this is important, right? Otherwise, we want to. I think how I summarize it, Liam, is that Slack, we don't have archiving, right? So the problem is, how do we, let's say, capture the information on a discussion? So Liam and John created this GitHub discussion. So the idea is to move some of these things there. Is that summarizing it a little bit?
For example,
so it's important. Yeah, it's important for everyone to look at this, because we want to institutionalize this mode of operation somehow.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, let's put it on the agenda for the next time. There's no ferocious rush. We can talk about it maybe on Wednesday. Just if I got 10 minutes at the beginning, I'll keep it to 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. And probably this is a great topic to discuss and converge in GitHub discussions, rather than waiting for till next week. And to your point.
Yeah. Okay, let's give it a try. Thank you all. One quick question: are those Yang models open source from 3gpp.org that was just pasted in? Or
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're open. I mean, I can check their license.
Yeah. Okay.
No, they are open. They are open for reading. Yeah.
So converting them, converting them. I just heard Joseph say he's not sure he can just. Right. He can't just take them directly, but if they're open source, maybe we can create derivatives of them.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so.
All right, let's check into their license.
That's why I said I'm inspired, not using directly, that's the word.
Right. Well, yeah, let's check their license. So awesome. Thanks, everybody. We're way over time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Okay, cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Yeah.